Hello again, Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 14, soon to be Southeastern 16, here to talk about Georgia's football schedule for the coming year. Dogs have a tough one in front of them, but of course they are expected to be the number one team in the country. So Georgia more than prepared to handle it, I think, but it will not be easy. Before we get into that, and I'll pull up the schedule here, Chase, tell us about our sponsor, BetOnline, please.
Yeah, BetOnline, your number one source for all of your summer betting needs this season. Whether it's baseball, golf, soccer, the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing, every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, the game starts here.
All right, Chase. I keep a set of power rankings. Average, the ones I'm using are Athlon's, Lindy's, Phil Steele, FPI, SP Plus, to kind of get an idea of how tough schedules are comparatively. Georgia's got roughly 5 games. Well, not roughly, 5 games among top 16 teams in that average of that poll that I've done. A couple more. If you want to dip down to the top 35, you can add 3 more. So 2/3 of the schedule against top 35 teams in the country, and starting right away with one, Clemson, it would be in that top 15 group in a game that we see played a lot, and interesting way for the Bulldogs to start the season here.
Yeah, it is. And, when you look at their schedule, I mean, you think of some SEC teams, they don't have a lot of the big names in there, but you look at Georgia, I mean, they've got Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas, the newcomer. There's a lot of big names on this schedule for the Georgia Bulldogs, and that's just part of playing in the SEC. But Georgia, again, is going to be a contender for the national championship. And what I find interesting about this Clemson matchup to start the season, it's a matchup we've seen several times before in season openers and played there in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz. And so I think this is an interesting matchup. The last time we saw this was 2021, and it was 10-3. Georgia won that game, and a lot of questions coming out of that opener on both sides, both teams. But Georgia, we know what Georgia went on to do that season. So, yeah, I think this is an interesting matchup. It's going to be interesting to see what Clemson brings. To me, there's a lot of questions on what Clemson is going to be and really the future of their program. But Georgia is going to be ready for this game, and it will be a very Georgia atmosphere there in Atlanta for this one for sure.
Yeah, noon Eastern kickoff. You can catch that one on ABC. Of course, that will be indoors. Thank God for everybody involved there.
Yes.
Tennessee Tech, week 2, September 7th. That'll be a 2 Eastern game on the pluses. So in other words, you better have your app ready for that one. I don't see a lot of need to go over Tennessee Tech. But then the Kentucky game, September 14th. Kentucky's not won this one in a while, but it feels like it's a team that makes it maybe a little bit more interesting than you would think. That'll be a 7:30 Eastern kickoff on ABC.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, how their schedule went. Excuse me, with Clemson, then a non-comment Tech, and then they jump right into SEC play with Kentucky. And it's interesting this Kentucky matchup here because obviously this is a game that Georgia has dominated, but I'm interested to see how Kentucky plays this year. I think their offense is going to be much better. They've made a lot of improvements, especially along the offensive line, which I think will be big this year. Give Brock Vandagriff some time to work. Speaking of Brock Vandagriff, he's going to be playing his former team in Georgia. So, I mean, that's a recipe for me. And you see this a lot, that he's going to go out and try to have the game of his life against his former team that he just transferred from. So maybe that could be an interesting, and it will be an interesting storyline, but maybe that will cause some interest in this game and maybe help Kentucky in their chances of beating Georgia, having a former player there on the roster and starting at quarterback. So I think this is an interesting first SEC game for Kentucky. And again, we'll be learning about both teams even at this point in week 3.
Yeah, kind of buried the lead there with Brock Vandagriff. Apologies for that. But in any case, a bye week Uh, Not often that you see SEC teams have a bye week this early. I don't know that it's a bad spot because you have gone through the rigors of fall camp. You played through 3 games. So in terms of the schedule, it's early. In terms of the workload, maybe not. But guess who else has a bye week? The only other team in the SEC with the bye week coming into this one, Alabama, which will be Georgia's next opponent on September the 28th.
I think this just kind of elevates this matchup that both teams have a bye week before, that they're able to spend really 2 weeks preparing for this matchup. This is a game that, yes, we've seen in the regular season, not always because of the East and the West. This has been an SEC championship matchup, uh, especially as of late. It was an incredible game last year with Alabama kind of playing spoiler to Georgia, keeping them out of the playoff and Alabama getting in. Um, this game is going to have so much hype around it, especially it being Kalen DeBoer's first SEC game. So Georgia will have played Kentucky. This will be for Alabama's first SEC game. It's going to be in Tuscaloosa. You've got to imagine that will be a sold-out Bryant-Denny Stadium. I am so looking forward to this matchup and what we could see here. You know, there's a lot of questions about Alabama, and people are saying, well, there's going to be a drop off. They're not going to be as good. I'm not buying into that. I think Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic coach and is going to have them ready and prepared for this game. I'm so looking forward to it, especially because both teams have the bye week before. They're going to have time to prepare. This should make for a really fun late September matchup. And again, maybe you see this matchup later on in the season, but we get a glimpse of it early this year.
Yeah, that'll be a 7:30 Eastern kickoff time on ABC. And yeah, you've seen this matchup a lot later in the season, as you mentioned. But interestingly enough, these teams played September 27th, 2008, Alabama winning 41-30, that way before Kirby Smart's arrival. Since that time, these teams have only played twice in the regular season, which seems kind of impossible. But they played October 3rd, 2015, Alabama winning 38-10. And they played October 17th, 2020, the COVID year in Tuscaloosa. So really, that's pretty crazy. In the last 16 years, they've only faced each other twice during the regular season. All right, next up here, and this is a series here where Georgia is away from Athens for almost a month between September 7th and when they get home next against Auburn on October 5th. Again, that the bye week factors in there. But Georgia Auburn, speaking of rivalries, this is one of the bigger ones in the league too.
Deep South's oldest rivalry, and you remember last year, it was really close, way closer than Georgia would have liked it to be. Auburn kept it within a touchdown a lot of the game, and so we know that where Auburn's at. Again, it's how is the offense going to be? Is there going to be some consistency? Is it going to be better? Auburn played really good against Georgia last year. They played really good against Alabama. Definitely the two best teams in their schedule last year. They competed with both of those, and it was super close games. We remember what happened at the Iron Bowl as well. So I think this could cause for a really interesting game to start October. That's another game we're used to seeing later on in the season. It wasn't until last year when we saw this one early in the season. It's usually we were so used to seeing that as a November matchup between Auburn and Georgia, but they moved it up. And, a lot of this, I think, depends on Auburn at this point, kind of where they're at. And this will be the first road game for Auburn. They would have played 5 straight heading into this one. So this could make for a really, interesting matchup just because, again, Auburn played them so well last year. I think Auburn's going to be a little bit improved. What kind of game plan will Hugh Freeze have against Kirby Smart? And but I think it'll definitely help being inside Sanford Stadium between the hedges there.
Yeah, Auburn's one of those teams that's sitting just outside the top 25 in most of these power rankings that I'm looking at, and pretty consistently in that low 30s range. FPI's got Auburn at 19th preseason. All right, next up, probably the easiest game in the conference that Georgia will have, Mississippi State. That will be a second straight home game for the Bulldogs. This one, as is the Auburn game, which is homecoming, also in that flex time slot, which means it could be an afternoon or an evening kickoff.
Yeah, Mississippi State is coming into this year. It's a new head coach, man, really it's just a whole new roster. And so it's hard to kind of project this what the season could look like for State. And this is a series that Georgia has really owned. They've won the last 4 meetings. They've done really well against Mississippi State. Again, with State being in the West and Georgia in the East in years past, again, this is not a matchup we've seen a ton of. But it's one that Georgia's dominated, and I know this is a game against you look at the schedule, a physical Auburn team and a physical Texas team that's the week ahead. This is one of those weeks that you can't look ahead to Texas. You got to play your game. You got to settle in and figure some things out in this game for what's to come.
Next up, Texas. I'm looking at all these power polls. There's kind of a consensus top 4 that everybody's got, and it's in this order. It's Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. The order may vary from place to place, but I think this will be maybe the most anticipated matchup in the country during the regular season this year, Chase.
It's interesting. Georgia has not been a road underdog since 2020 when they went to Alabama and lost that game. I'm not saying they're going to be a road dog in this one, but they could be, depending on where Texas is at as well, with it being in Austin. So you're right. I think this could be, we like to tab game of the century to games all the time. And I think this could be one of those game of the century, as people like to call it, type games, because you're looking at 2 teams that very likely could be maybe in the top 3 in the country at this point. Now, one thing I think will play in Georgia's favor in this game, Texas is going to be coming off that rivalry against Oklahoma the week before in Dallas. Big rivalry game, and then they're going to turn around and play Georgia. They got Oklahoma and Georgia back to back, does the Longhorns. And so I think Georgia may be catching them at a good time coming off that Oklahoma game, whatever happens. If it's a big win over Oklahoma, you got to wonder about a letdown. If it's a loss, you got to wonder where they're at. They could be playing with a chip on their shoulder. But I think this may be one of the funnest matchups in SEC football this year. Yeah. This should be great.
Interestingly enough, Chase, the other 2 teams in that foursome, Ohio State and Oregon, play the week before. So this is when we're really going to start to get – now, I think all 4 teams are probably going to be the playoff, but maybe the pecking order, buys, those things are going to matter. That this is about the time of the season where we will start to see some clarity, and particularly for Georgia, which at this point will have its 2 toughest games, and Alabama and Texas out of the way. Next up, the annual rivalry with Florida, which is, as we talked about on our podcast earlier this week, we're doing this late June. A lot of attention on Billy Napier and the Gators is because of that schedule, the hot seat talk, but Florida's got a better offense that I think than most people realize. And in a rivalry game in a neutral site, look, I'm not saying Florida's going to upset Georgia. I am saying this may not be the runaway that a lot of people would probably think when we talk about this game.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, both teams actually have the week off the Saturday before, so it's kind of like with Alabama, Georgia earlier in the season. Alabama, Georgia both with a bye week. Georgia, Florida both with the bye week heading into this one. But yeah, I think this game depends a lot on kind of where Florida's at this point. I mean, they have the toughest schedule in the SEC, if not the country, as we've talked about. They are going to have a bye week before that. They're going to have a stretch of UCF, Tennessee, and Kentucky with that Tennessee game on the road. So they're going to be in some really tough games. Then they'll have a bye week, then this Georgia game, and then Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, the 3 to follow this Georgia matchup. So you got to wonder where Florida is going to be at this game mentally, physically? Will they have enough depth, at this point of the season? So, yeah, it's a rivalry game though, and it's you think about the tradition of this game, and it is. We've seen some really great games over the years, and
Yeah.
so, but Georgia, I mean, it's they've been dominating the series as of late, really, minus a couple of years in there, but. I think it should be fun regardless, just because it's a rivalry game.
Yeah. Well, as a note for Florida, Florida plays 8 of the top 18 teams in this little informal power poll I've put together, and that is the start. Correction. That is actually no, it is. It's the start of 5 games in a row against those top 18. So, yeah, this is it's already tough for Billy Napier at this point of the season. This is when it gets really tough. That's going to be a 3:30 game, of course, on ABC, as it usually is. So, all right, next up, Ole Miss. That's in Oxford. That's in the flex window, meaning it could be a morning or a night game. This will be a game I cannot wait to watch these two teams play because of the points that these offenses can put up.
Oh, yeah. Interesting note here. Georgia's won 5 straight in Oxford, Mississippi. And Ole Miss is going to be looking to change that, because this is a totally different Ole Miss team than I think we've seen in the last few years that these teams have played. Again, this is not a game we have seen every year. Last year, this was a really surprising outcome, 52-17. Georgia laid it on a pretty good Ole Miss team, but I think Ole Miss is going to be improved this year. The offense is going to be different. I think in a very good way. I think it's going to be a pretty good offense, and so this should be a really fun matchup because of the two offenses that we have. And I think Ole Miss's defense is going to be much better. And we know Georgia will always have a good defense under Kirby Smart, and really deep in a lot of positions on defense. So I think we talked about how Georgia Texas is going to be a really fun game. Georgia and Alabama should be a really fun game. I'm looking forward to this one as well. Georgia Ole Miss, again, another team who at this point of the season is going to be eyeing that college football playoff.
Well, the next one could be fun too, depending
Yeah.
on how good Tennessee's offense is. I mean, I think the defense will be okay. We know about Tennessee's quarterback situation with Nico. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name because I still have no confidence in my ability to get it right. But and would this game be more interesting in Knoxville? Probably so. I think Georgia will be probably a double-digit favorite, but this one could be interesting too with quarterback play.
I think so too, and I think Tennessee has some receivers around Nico that even if he isn't as great as everyone says he is, which I think he's a really good quarterback, he's got the pieces around them for them to be successful and them to win a lot of games. And so I think, depending on where their offense is, this game could be really interesting. And again, this could be one of those games that if Tennessee is rolling and they've only lost, 1 or 2 games, well, that could make for an interesting matchup here too, because Tennessee could be on a spot in the 12-team playoffs. So
Yeah.
you get to this point of the season, and so many teams could be looking for a spot in the playoff, could be looking at that at-large bid, or maybe even looking at a spot in the SEC championship. Tennessee could, depending on how things have gone. So, at this point, a lot could have happened in the season. I think Tennessee could be a surprise team for sure.
Next up, the easiest game on the schedule by far, UMass on November the 23rd. That'll be in a 12:45 Eastern kickoff slot on the SEC Network. UMass probably going to be one of the bottom 5 teams in the FBS, so not really sure how much this one deserves a lot of talk. And then the rivalry with Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is probably going to be a borderline top 50 team nationally. So maybe a team that could get to a bowl with 6 or 7 wins. And of course, the rivalry aspect of it too. This one will be on Tech's turf in Atlanta. That'll be a Friday game, by the way, at night.
Yeah, this is an interesting game, because you remember last year Georgia Tech did not have a great year, but they played this game well. It was 31-23 was the final score. Georgia winning that one, but Tech competed. they play, and I think Brent Key has them playing with an edge. You know, they may not be the most talented team on the field, but he's got them playing with an edge, and he's got them believing. And so I think that'll help going into this matchup of Georgia Tech will want to make something happen. I mean, this is again a series that Georgia has absolutely dominated, and Tech wants to change that. They want to spoil Georgia's chances at a playoff and at a national championship. So, you know, I'm not saying Georgia Tech's going to go out there and win, but I think they could make it interesting.
Yeah, and then of course, if things go according to plan for Georgia, the next week will be the SEC championship game at 4 Eastern on ABC. That'll be the fourth straight game that Georgia would not have left the state of Georgia to play a football game. So, but that's very presumptive because, man, it is a tough schedule. Again, you got potentially 8 of the top 35 teams in the country. And in an era where parity is more of a thing in college football, you remember the playoff race last year. I think Georgia's schedule more, it's just harder to run away and hide from other teams the way Alabama and Georgia have in recent years.
Oh, I certainly agree with that. That's very true now, and that makes things fun. That makes things interesting for sure.
All right. Thank you for watching our video here about Georgia's schedule. We're going to be doing this for all SEC teams. We're going to be covering your favorite team wall to wall during the season. If that team is in the SEC, best way to get that, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. That helps us get noticed and enable your notifications. So when we do more videos, you can see those. We also cover baseball and basketball. Anyway, I'm Chris Lee. He's Chase Robinson. Thank you for watching us here at Southeastern 14.